Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of our weekly Tiger Club Zoom call. Today is Tuesday, January 25th. Our guests today from the Kansas City Sports Commission will be Kathy Nelson and Dave Borchardt. Before we get to them, I'd always like to remind you to visit our website at kctigerclub.com for updated information on upcoming events, also to see a list of our sponsors. If you're not a member, please consider joining. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like button so that eventually I can have a second career as a social media influencer. Thanks to Darren Wydick for engineering our weekly calls, also for filling in for me last week as the host. And always special kudos for our team of Paul Blackman, Barry Canner, and Dave Tyson for lining up our guests each week. And we are very excited today to have Kathy and Dave. Kathy has been executive director, CEO, president of the Kansas City Sports Commission, just celebrated her 10-year anniversary. She's been named by the Kansas City Star as one of the top 50 most influential sports people in Kansas City history. And in 2020, she was also named to the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. Dave is the director of corporate and community relationships for the Sports Commission. He is a Mizzou grad, former 810 WHD employee, and he is the director of the very successful Kansas City Marathon. Dave and Kathy, welcome. We really appreciate you taking your time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
This is fantastic. And I would be wearing my black and gold today, but it is Chiefs victory week. So I did break out my red.
All right, that's fully acceptable. So I was fortunate enough to attend that game. Before we get to some of the upcoming events, it was the most amazing football game I've ever seen. Hosting the AFC Championship, obviously the Sports Commission has no pull on where that's held, but what kind of economic impact does that have on the city to host it 4 years in a row?
Well, we don't track those numbers specifically because it's not an event that we would bid on and bring to our city. However, I think all of us agree that when you're driving around town, the restaurants and the bars are full, the parking lot is full, there's plenty of places that are taking your dollars. So there's absolutely an economic activity and economic lift by hosting these. There's also this extra awareness. There's a marketing that comes with this that we would never be able to afford to purchase. And we've been fortunate to use all of this success in attracting other events that I'm sure we'll get to, but there's absolutely 4 times in a row, it gets better and better every year.
Before we get to some of the upcoming events and things you're working on, in 2020, Mizzou was supposed to play Arkansas at Arrowhead, and they were also supposed to play Kansas in basketball at then Sprint Center, now T-Mobile Center. I think the Tigers are penciled in for a 2025 date at Arrowhead with an opponent to be named. But what other events, or when can we see the Tigers play in Kansas City?
Well, with the basketball, we did a 6-year agreement between Mizzou and KU. So that basketball game will take place in 2025 and 2026 at T-Mobile Center. And then, like you mentioned, in football. So we're always in conversation with Mizzou about football at Arrowhead and, making sure that we're always doing the right thing. We know the importance of hosting those games at home in Columbia, but we also think Kansas City market's a great market for them. So 2025 football, and then hopefully then a few years after that, but for sure basketball. And of course, women's basketball, we've talked about doing a double header with women's basketball. And then wrestling, we are hosting in 2024 the NCAA Division I Men's Wrestling Championship here in Kansas City, and our host partner is the University of Missouri. So we're really excited to work with Mizzou on hosting Division I wrestling.
Dave, you're the director of the Kansas City Marathon. I saw that it's now been rated one of the top 20 marathons in the country. It's really grown over the years. I'm a former runner. Knees are too sore now to compete. But tell me about the growth of that event and how it's become so successful.
Well, I think a big key is just really we've tapped into the civic pride here in Kansas City. I know, Mark, you said you're a former runner. Kansas City is not the easiest city to run around. There's lots of hills, all the cool areas of town. You kind of have to go down a hill to get into it. Then you have to have an uphill to get out. So that includes the plaza and downtown and 18th and Vine and Westport and pretty much everywhere. So we've sort of given up on the thought of making it a really flat and easy race course. And we've tried to really embrace the idea that this is a running tour of Kansas City. So you're seeing all the big local landmarks and running in places you couldn't ordinarily run because of traffics and street lights and stuff like that. So you're running through the plaza on 47th Street and through Westport and up to the World War I Memorial, in front of Union Station, up to the Kauffman Center, past City Hall, out to 18th and Vine, in front of the Nelson Atkins. And then the full marathon people also get to tack on cool sites down south like Ward Parkway and Waldo and Brookside. So it's really just kind of tapping into the Kansas City pride. It is the Kansas City Marathon, so we need to embrace everything about Kansas City. We also have our expo, the pre-race event at Union Station, obviously an iconic Kansas City landmark. We serve Boulevard beer, among other products, in the post-race party, and have Kansas City barbecue from Plowboys Barbecue. So we're just trying to do all things Kansas City. And just real quick, I know Kathy mentioned the MUKU rivalry. I'd like to give her a massive shout out because she was such a key part of getting that rivalry renewed. I know for me as a Mizzou fan, I'd kind of given up hope and was thinking this might not ever happen again, or if it did, it might be when I was, old. But it's been great to see that come back, even though I know the game this year didn't go the way we wanted it to. But Kathy gets massive credit because I know she was in all those meetings and helped make that happen.
Well, and we appreciate and we're excited to see it too. And I think the future games will be more competitive. I want to get to the World Cup bid. I want to know what all you all had to go through to do that and where we stand in the process with getting a host site for 2026.
Mark, we might need some Boulevard beer to be able to walk you through everything that we've been doing in this process. For us as an organization, it started back in 2016 when all of the different cities around the country, that were interested started to get involved. And then from there, it was narrowed down and continued to be narrowed down. And we kept making the cut to move on. Then in 2017, and we were bidding against numerous countries. So then Mexico and Canada reached out to US Soccer, and those three head organizations decided to create this united bid as one North America bid. So we bid as North America and won that opportunity in 2017. And then the work kicked in. So we've been now narrowed down to one of 22 cities across North America. There's a few cities in Canada, a few cities in Mexico, and then there are 17 current cities in the United States. The 22 cities across the North American footprint will be cut down to 16 cities, and we are awaiting that final negotiation with them. So our work has ranged everywhere from, of course, working with Arrowhead, where the matches will be played, to, of course, working with Sporting KC and now the KC current women's soccer team, and then really starting to get into the weeds on the details of transportation, fundraising, human rights. We've spent 2 years working on our human rights piece of the bid. Legacy projects that are attached to this, what happens in Kansas City when hosting this, everything from how do we grow grass, the type of grass they need us to grow, and then of course, like I mentioned, workers' rights. Unfortunately, sex trafficking in Kansas City is a thing, and so we've had to figure out ways to, as we work through that, if we're awarded 2026. So now the work has gone from years and years of bidding to now we've hosted a site visit back in October where FIFA executives actually came to Kansas City for 3 days and saw our city in person, met the key people around the table, ranging from both mayors of KCK, KCMO, Mark Donovan, and then the owners, Clark Hunt and Cliff Elig, were with us in our time with FIFA. So we've got through that site visit, made that next step, and now we're working on negotiating our rental fees with Arrowhead on behalf of Arrowhead for FIFA. So of course, FIFA wants everything at no cost, but yet there will be a rental fee and a few other things to help us offset a few things. But I feel like we're in a really good place with our bid. I feel very strongly, like whenever you read an article about World Cup in 2026, typically Kansas City is mentioned. I used to think we are truly an underdog, and now in meeting with all of my counterparts across North America, I feel like we're in a win situation. And then the heavy work begins once we're selected, and we should know by April of this year if we're selected for 2026. And the crazy thing is they're about 2 years behind in making this decision. So we should have known beginning of 2020 if we were going to be a host in 26. And you really need those 6 years of ramp up time to get this right. Because of the pandemic, because Qatar, where the World Cup is being hosted this year, is having lots of issues. And then the Arab World Cup also had issues. They're focused more on some of that. So they're way behind in selecting these cities, but we're close.
Do we have enough hotel space now to be adequate for hosting it?
Yes, if we had not had the hotel space even back in 2017, and then again when we made the cut in 2018, 2019, we wouldn't be where we are today. So you can't move forward with a bid, and where especially a World Cup bid, if you don't meet the qualifications. And of course, the main one of those is hotel space.
Coming up next year, NFL draft you've secured,
Yep.
and I'm thinking the airport will be complete in time for that. That was part of it. Talk about that process. That's an exciting thing. And is that going to be held at Union Station? Is that correct?
Well, that's the plan. It will be held. The plan is to build a stage out on Pershing where you have both the National World War I Monument Museum and Union Station between as our visual. So that's the plan. That doesn't mean it won't change. When it was hosted in Nashville, the actual stage and main stage area changed 8 times, and they didn't make the final decision until about 5 weeks out. So there's a lot of moving pieces to that. So I do believe that, of course, that's where we think would be perfect to host it, but we have also a secondary idea of the Nelson Atkins Museum, that big lawn, and then would bleed over into Tice Park. That could be a potential an option, but I do think where you mentioned Union Station would be the perfect spot for it. And that was a fascinating bid process. We were told multiple times, and I just kept going back. I'm like, but you don't understand what you have here. And they're like, well, not Kansas City this time. I'm like, but you don't get it. You need to come to Kansas City. And when we presented, when they finally gave up, I think they're fed up with my calls. They said, all right, you can come to New York and present. We'll see your pitch. And so Mark Donovan, and at the time our city manager was Troy Schulte. The 3 of us flew to New York to do our NFL draft pitch in front of 27 NFL event executives. And I started off the pitch and just asked, how many of you have been to Kansas City? Thinking, of course, it's the NFL, so everyone will say yes. 2 of those 27 people had been to our city. That blew my mind. But then you take a step back and realize these are NFL events people. They work on the Pro Bowl and on the Super Bowl and on the draft. So they don't go to games and don't work with the clubs. They work on NFL events. So I had to take a step back. We didn't, of course, win that year, and we refocused our whole pitch and went back again, and were successful then that 4th or 5th time in securing the draft. So, and actually at the time you mentioned the airport, Mark, at the time the airport wasn't even a thing yet. We were talking about it as a city, but it hadn't been voted on. We were awarded the NFL draft before the airport became reality. Thank goodness that happened. I've told the airport officials, don't make us the test dummy to open that airport. Make sure you're done well in time before Big 12 basketball, because I don't want any hiccups. But we're very grateful for that we have a new airport ready to go.
I'm a big NFL fan. I follow the draft closely. I can't say I would get on a plane to go to it personally, but how many folks come in?
Well, in Nashville, they had about 300,000 people attend. So we're estimating that we would have about 250,000 people in attendance over those 3 days. The NFL thinks it'll be bigger than that. And you'd be surprised, especially being in the Midwest. We think there'll be a lot of people that will drive to the draft. We're a day's drive, which we consider that an 8-hour drive for 55 million people. And here in the heart of the country, we think it'll be pretty easy for people to get to us.
Very excited. I guess I'm not as rabid a fan as I thought I was, but yeah, right.
Mark, your mic is covered. I think we're not hearing your questions very well.
It's not. But
You're back now. We heard the last couple words you said.
Got a bad. I'm sorry, folks. David, when we get these big events and your job as director of community relationships, what do you do as soon as we get have a winning bid? What's your role?
So it's interesting with a lot of these, we call them national events in our office. So events we bring into Kansas City from outside the city. So that could be the NFL draft, the World Cup, the Big 12 basketball tournament. My main role is trying to get corporate partners and sponsors for the KC Sports Commission events. So things like the Kansas City Marathon that we own and operate. For a lot of these national events that come in from outside Kansas City, that's not something I can really be a part of just because, you know, FIFA has their own corporate partners for the World Cup and the NFL has their own corporate partners for the NFL draft. So it's not like I can go to Community America Credit Union and make them a sponsor of the NFL draft just because that's not, you know, a realistic option. So my role changes a lot for those national events and I just kind of fit in as I can, helping coordinate. Could be things like sponsorship activation for some of those corporate partners. I know I did some of that for the Chiefs Parade that we hosted a couple years ago. And then also we do have the ability to create some ancillary events sometimes around those national events. So for example, like I said, the Big 12 basketball tournament comes to town. I can't necessarily sell a sponsorship for the Big 12 tournament, but we have a race associated with the Big 12 tournament called the Big 12 Run that kicks off the championship game day. And we have corporate sponsors for that race that takes place right outside T-Mobile Center. And then we also have the opportunity to sell Big 12 basketball VIP packages. And I sell those to different corporate people that they'll use for entertaining clients or entertaining employees.
And I will say on Dave's behalf, like with the NFL draft, we will need to raise a lot of money to host the draft. That's an expectation of the city. So we will need to raise a couple $1 million, and Dave is forefront in that, helping us put together what that package looks like, what the VIP experience looks like. And so his plate's quite full with these events, even though, like he said, when NCAA comes to town, we can't sell a sponsorship to that. We can typically do something ancillary. And so Dave, we're all hands on deck, whether that's creating an event, selling that event, making sure the sponsor's happy at the end of that event, and then just making sure our community is aware of it.
Talking to Kathy Nelson and Dave Borchardt from the Kansas City Sports Commission. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the chat feature at the bottom and we will give that to them at the end of our discussion. Turning to basketball, we have an NCAA regional next year. Yep. And Big 12 tournament, correct me if I'm wrong, is here till 2025.
Correct.
At this time. I know they haven't named anything past 2026, but I assume we're active in bidding for future NCAA and Big 12 tournament events.
Correct. Yep. We are always forming relationships. So with the membership change in the Big 12 conference, of course, now we're responsible for meeting those new athletic directors and presidents that actually make that decision of where the championship is, and thanking the schools that are exiting, but now we're focused on the schools that are entering the conference so that they also vote to extend it or to re-award it to Kansas City. And then with NCAA, it's a 4-year bid cycle. So that bid cycle will come up in 2023 for the next 4 years. And there's, of course, as you know, 89 different sports across all 3 divisions. And so we're very strategic on which events that we bid on, what works for our city, what works for our bid partners and our venues. So we'll start to strategize around that by the end of 2022. So we're always in this perpetual bid cycle.
Any chance on a bidding for a women's Final Four?
Yes, we bid on that, not this past bid cycle, but the bid cycle before. Unfortunately not awarded. They select 4 cities because it's a 4-year bid cycle, and they came back to us and said, you were number 5. That doesn't make me feel any better. I hate to lose. That's not great. They felt like maybe our city didn't, how did they say this, that our city didn't prove enough that we had the financial ability to host this. You know, these championships are very expensive to host. And even though we shared where our bank accounts were and everything, they didn't feel like we had enough people step up to the plate saying, no matter what, I'm giving $50,000, $100,000 to help the efforts, where other cities had a lot of people around the table with them. So that was a miss on my part of gathering those people. So now that I know, when we go to do that again, that if we bid on a women's Final Four again, now I know.
You're busy.
Yeah, I like to be busy. Yes.
There's been some talk, and it's been well publicized now, the Royal probably looking at a downtown stadium side. What will the commission's role be in that process?
Yeah, so our board of directors was fortunate at our December board meeting. We actually got to review the pitch from the Royals. We saw a lot of the renderings and started to understand where they're coming from on this. They showed us their first draft of their promotional video that they plan to share publicly. So our board, as we start to understand the finances behind it, will take a stand on this and more than likely be supportive. My role in my chair right now is really just to help open doors for the Royals. Making sure like our women's soccer team owners, they're now communicating with the Royals owners. How did they finance, even though it's a much different scale, how did they finance their stadium and what does that look like? And really being a listening ear and setting up meetings for Mr. Sherman. When he's like, I need to get in front of people, he of course has his circle of people as far as sponsors go and key contributors to the organization and his ownership group. But then I'm helping beyond that, making sure that they have a circle of champions around them, and then helping with any city concerns and issues they might have. And as they get into this, should they decide to do a public vote, then we would assist with that.
In all these processes, throw it to both of you, Kathy and Dave. What is the procedure, or what kind of support do you get from the mayor's office and the city council?
Well, we receive little to zero public dollars. Once in a while, things like Big 12 or NCAA, where there's a massive financial commitment to host these, we'll tap into the city and ask them to pay a small portion of that commitment. And really then we're the pass through of those finances. So we'll, invoice the city for however much, and that goes right back out. So financially zero, if you will, but strategically, and when it comes to pitching business, very, very, very much connected. I would tell you, the mayor and I have become very close friends. I need him. Right now, we're working to get UMKC into the Missouri Valley Conference. And the mayor and I flew to St. Louis together on December 19th to meet with the presidents of the Missouri Valley Conference. So he's lockstep in everything we're doing. We have weekly phone calls where I'm updating him on projects and where we need him to really lean in. So between the mayor and the city manager, that's who we mostly lean on. And then council, I try and update them as needed on projects that we're working on.
Kathy, you've been in charge just over 10 years. I think you had your 10-year anniversary in November.
Right.
How much has the office grown since you've been in charge?
I missed that last part. How much of the
How much
office?
has your office grown staff-wise?
Oh,
You've been in charge?
yeah. So when I started, we were a staff of 5. We now have grown. We're at 16 now. Doesn't sound like much, but we're the largest sports commission in the country, both head count and budget. And we also have the largest number of events that we own and operate and that we bid on. So we're not out there to be the biggest. We just happen to fall into that spot. So it's grown significantly.
You've done a great job. You took over for a good friend of ours, Kevin Gray.
Yep.
He was a personal friend, and he had just spoken to the Tiger Club right before he was diagnosed.
Yep.
When all that happened, that had to be, it happened so quickly, it had to be a real challenge for you to assume the reins.
It was an emotional roller coaster. My background's in television and sports television. I've produced a lot of Missouri basketball games. I've spent many, many, many hours in the TV truck in Columbia producing basketball. And Kevin Gray, I have daughters, he has daughters. We'd see each other every weekend, and he was like, you need to come off the road doing all this TV stuff and come work for me. So I agreed to that idea in 2010 and left my television career and went to work for Kevin in 2010 as the Win for KC director, overseeing our women's initiatives inside of the Sports Commission office. And 6 months later, he was gone. So it was very shocking. I still, in my office at the Sports Commission, I keep a handwritten letter from him in my top desk drawer that I see every day when I go to grab a pen. And it just says, I have all the faith in the world in you. I don't know where I'll be, but when I hired you, I knew you were a champion. And sometimes I need to hear that some days. Working in sports is glamorous. It's not always easy. So that handwritten note from him before he passed is very powerful still today. I've made many copies of it in case anything happens to it. But it was hard to follow. I consider him an icon for Kansas City. It was very difficult to follow in his footsteps because I wanted to make him proud.
And I think you have. Dave, talk about your career path. You were in radio. How did you end up at the Sports Commission?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at 810 and I started there as an intern running the board, and then ended up becoming a producer for Jason Whitlock's show back in the day.
Oh my.
Which first job out of college, Whitlock, obviously a super controversial figure. I had to get up at 3:45 every day to go get the show prepared and all that stuff. So that was crazy. And then went from there to producing the Crunch Time show when that started, which was Bill Moss, Tim Grunhard, and Frank Bowl. And I know Kathy's real tight with those three guys. And yeah, that was like being in a frat house every single day, because those guys are just celebrities around Kansas City. And it was always fun going and doing stuff with them. And then I ended up going to Kevin Keatsman's show, producing that in my last couple of years at 810. And then I also would host our Chiefs pregame and postgame radio shows, and also the evening show during the week at 810. So I kind of did behind the scenes stuff and on air stuff. And one of the things I did in my free time was I started doing sideline reporting for the Kansas City Wizards, Sporting KC before the rebrand. And, it's funny, like 15 years ago, I didn't like soccer at all. I thought it was a boring sport, guys fall down and they flop around and all those, kind of generalizations. And when I saw that up close, being the sideline reporter, it was like, wow, this is a fast physical sport. And then on top of that, the people in soccer are just great, down to earth people. Sometimes if you get an NFL player or a baseball player, they could have a big ego, right? They make so much money and they're so held in high esteem, but Major League Soccer is a different deal. I mean, a lot of you on the call have probably met Matt Beasler or Sestanovic or some of those guys, and they're just great, down to earth people. So I fell in love with the team and with the sport, and they had an opening for a PR manager, and they asked me to come join them in 2008. And a lot of media people have made that transition just because we have all the contacts in the media world. So it's easy to get press coverage and stuff like that. So was at 810 from 2000 to 2008, went to the Wizards from 2008 to 2011. So I got to be there when they went from being the Wizards to Sporting KC and the stadium construction and the stadium opening. And that's definitely one of the highlights of my career, just seeing them going from being a sort of a minor league team in Kansas City, more at the level of what people would think about with, Comets, Mavericks, Monarchs. And after that rebranding in the stadium, it was pretty quick that they were up there with the Chiefs and Royals, or at least really close to it. So that was a cool experience. But at that point, I had two young boys. And for Sporting, I was working 6 days a week, 9 months out of the year, and also traveling to about half the road games. So I started to look around for something that was a little more, Monday through Friday. And I landed at Time Warner Cable, and I did PR and community relations for them from 2011 to 2016, which I know Kathy was, the Time Warner Cable for a long time as well, helping get Metro Sports off the ground. And I had first met Kathy when I was at 810 and doing some Friday night football games and stuff like that. There was a lot of crossover there, but Time Warner Cable was not as exciting as Sporting and 810 and the Sports Commission, but it was kind of that Monday through Friday thing. It was stable. And the only issue really was they went through a merger and they said, hey, we love you. We want you to stay and we want you to move to Wisconsin. And, my wife hates the winters in Kansas City. So the idea of moving to Wisconsin was not super appealing. And I reached out to Kathy at the time, and I think the Sports Commission had a marketing manager job posted, and I'd done a decent amount of marketing back when I was with Sporting KC. And I remember I heard back and they said, yeah, we have this open, but we're also going to be hiring a director of events. And it was like, oh, great. That's awesome. Because that's what I'm doing at Time Warner Cable is these community events. And I remember when I interviewed with Kathy, we got a coffee at, where was it? It was the Roastery in Brookside, I think. And I told her, I said, I'll do whatever you need. I think, I could be a good fit because, I'm a runner, so I can help with the marathon. I'm a lifelong Kansas City sports fan. And, I'm really passionate about the mission. I said, the one thing I can't do is sales. So please don't have me do sales. I'm not comfortable asking people for money. And then after about a year or two being director of events, she's like, we need you to be our sales partnerships guy. And it's actually gone great because I look at my role as, I don't want to be a pushy car sales guy. I just want to talk to people and build relationships. And that's really what I love to do is kind of tell the story of the sports commission, who we are, what we do, learn from these different Kansas City corporations, who they are and what they're looking for. And if we can have partnerships, that's great. If not, I can at least find someone new that can maybe connect me to someone else. So it's funny. I've had jobs throughout my career I've loved. 810 probably the silliest and most crazy, but I've always said this is like my dream job because I'm getting to really push that passionate level of Kansas City sports every day. So I just love it.
All right.
And Mark, I have to brag on Dave with the marathon. We had never had anyone that worked and focused on asking for money. That always just fell on my shoulders, or whomever was in charge of the event also had to go raise the money, right? It was an afterthought. And I noticed within Dave's first year when we were doing these big events, how he would walk around and he would much rather spend time on meeting with people and thanking them and going, what can we do better? How do we grow this partnership with you? Than making sure the medals and the water was out at the finish line. And I could just pivot and see where his skill set was and what we needed and the gap we had. And we can't live without Dave. I mean, it's crazy how he has turned this idea of let's create this role for you into a real big deal. And other commissions across the country now are kind of looking at us as a model for it.
Well, I'll tell you real quick, another thing that Kathy's awesome about is, kind of pursuing your hobbies on the side, as long as you get your work done. So she's allowed me to continue doing some broadcasting things on the side. So I still host the Sporting KC post-game radio show on 810, which is just a fun thing that I can do as a hobby on the side. And then last year, I also got to start doing the TV broadcasts for the Current. At that point, they were called Kansas City NWSL. And I think there's a good chance I'll get to do those again this upcoming season. So I appreciate Kathy, will give me the flexibility to do that stuff. Because for me, that's just a fun way I can keep doing some broadcasting stuff on the side.
Kathy, before we got on the call, we talked about your new position as also president of Visit KC, which is the old Kansas City Convention and Visitors Bureau. Yeah. How the heck are you going to do both jobs?
I have incredibly good people around me. So this is very unique. As a matter of fact, I fly out in the morning because there's a national convention of CEOs for destination marketing organizations and sports commissions, and they want me to be their keynote. I'm like, well, I'm new into this, but I'll tell you what I've learned so far. So when their CEO for Visit KC resigned last summer, their board of directors came to me and said, we've talked about this off and on for a few years. Every time they have a leadership changeover, what about the Sports Commission and Visit KC working more closely together? We all agreed that it's not in our best interest to merge the two organizations by any means. The Sports Commission in Kansas City is extremely strong, and we get events awarded to us like the NFL draft because we're a separate entity. But we do work with Visit KC often on multiple levels. And so I said, I don't want to merge these, but I get that there's something here. And so we sat down, formed a transition team, and came up with the idea of a leased employment agreement. So as I shared, I'm a full-time employee of the Sports Commission, but Visit KC leases 50% of my attention. So as of January 1, just a few weeks ago, I now split my time physically. Today, I'm sitting in my Visit KC office. Monday, Wednesdays, I'm typically physically in the Sports Commission office, and Tuesday, Thursday here, and then Friday just depends where I'm needed most. But when I'm here today at Visit KC, I'm on my Sports Commission computer, And I see emails coming in both directions. So I have 2 computers, 2 phones right now. We're working with IT to figure out, can I get to at least 1 computer so I don't have to travel with 2 laptops? That would be pleasant, but we'll figure it out. And there's so many similarities and there's efficiencies that I'm learning. I think down the road, I don't in my heart believe we'd ever merge these 2 organizations, but I do think there's some shared resources that we can get smarter about. And I think we'll become a model for the country on a shared CEO type of role. I say that and I'm a month in and still smiling. So ask me in another month. And if and when the Chiefs win Sunday, 100% of my attention goes to planning the parade. So for Super Bowl. And then everyone knows I had a staff meeting here today at Visit KC and just said, following Sunday, depending on the outcome, I'm neither, and then I'm this for 2 weeks to get us through Super Bowl.
Oh my. Before we get to questions, excuse me, from our viewers, any other events that you can tell us about that you're working on that maybe we haven't heard about?
Yeah, tomorrow's a big morning for us. We're a finalist for the Rugby World Cup in 2031. And the FIFA World Cup is the #1, the biggest sporting event in the world. And then of course there's Summer Olympics, Tour de France. The World Cup, the Rugby World Cup is the 5th largest sporting event in the world. So there is always something happening in the background here. That's a significant bid. We've been working on that bid for about 2 years and, trying to figure out what that's like, what that could look like in our city. But it's kind of cool to be a finalist for that. And we'll see how that plays out. That could potentially mean we would host Women's Rugby World Cup in 2027 and Men's World Cup in 2031. So fingers crossed that comes together. We're looking at field hockey and lacrosse. If there's an opportunity to host some international matches here, and then also looking at bringing back the U.S. Figure Skating Championships. We hosted that in 2017. We broke an attendance record for them. So looking at that bid potentially for 2028, I think is what we're looking at. And then also gymnastics. We have a call next week about hosting the U.S. gymnastics Olympic qualifiers for the upcoming Summer Olympics. So those are the big things we're working on. Of course, extending Big 12 and NCAA and NAIA, looking at UMKC, moving them over to Missouri Valley potentially, and just trying to figure out what's next with MIAA and others.
Wow. Okay, we'll take some questions from our viewers. The Negro Leagues Baseball Museum is a true gem for Kansas City. Describe the importance of it, of Bob Kendrick, and of the Buck O'Neill legacy to the area.
Bob is a true gem for Kansas City. Of course, the museum is, but can you picture that museum without Bob? I have a hard time thinking. I always tell Bob, when you retire, I'm retiring, because that means the city's kind of shutting down here. So when we host events, in a Big 12 example, when we host these athletes in our city, when they're here for 4 or 5 days, that game is only 2 hours of their day. We always make sure that we provide them the opportunity to go tour the Negro Leagues Museum and then the CBE downtown. So we use that as a tool for a lot of these events that we're bringing in, to expose people outside of our community to the museum. Then even things like on my Visit KC hat, next week, we have a very big site visit for the American Legion to host their national convention in 2027. And we are touring them through the Negro Leagues Museum, and Bob is helping us with that. So we are always in connection with Bob. And of course, with Buck now getting into the Hall of Fame this coming summer will be very special for us.
Regarding the World Cup, does it help KC's bid somewhat that we are not very close to other bidding cities? In other words, is it unlikely that both Washington and Baltimore would be chosen, or Miami and Orlando?
I have no idea. I don't know that FIFA has any idea. We've been told at one time that they were going to do a grouping of cities. It might be the Northeast and the Southeast get it and no one west of the Mississippi is awarded, or it might be all of the West Coast and maybe a central city. And then they've talked about, well, they're going to spread it out all over so everyone can see North America. I don't think anyone really knows yet. even FIFA. I think it's up to the final bid and the final negotiations. The other thing with World Cup to remember is even if we're not awarded matches, we are a World Cup city come 2026. We could be a host, a base camp for these countries. And that means, and I'll use Germany as an example. Germany needs a place to live for 6 weeks. So they might select Kansas City. So even though they're not playing games here, they would come in, as would their fans. Brazil, for instance, wherever they go, they'll have 10 to 30,000 fans that go and live with that team, whichever city they're in. Germany in the last 4 World Cups has gone in and built their own training facility and left that as a legacy. So even if we're not hosting matches at Arrowhead, which I do think we're really a front runner for, we will have the ability to be base camps and fan fest for World Cup.
Just my 2 cents. If FIFA does decide to have a Midwest host city, I feel strongly about Kansas City having the best soccer culture out of those candidates. If you're looking at Denver, Cincinnati, Nashville, I mean, soccer here, I know Sporting is kind of branded Kansas City as the soccer capital of America, but it's true in a lot of ways. So yeah. We have great facilities here. We have a great soccer culture. It literally is the most central option. It's, easy to get to, short flight from the coast. And like Kathy said, it's an easy drive from all the surrounding states. Another cool part of our bid is it's a regional bid. So we have support from all these surrounding states. It's not just a bid for, Cincinnati, who has the support of Cleveland, for example, in the state of Ohio, but we literally have support of all these surrounding states, which is pretty cool. So it's a regional bid. And like I said, I think our culture and facilities here are just awesome.
Next question. What is the source of funding? Does it have any legal authority over?
Can you repeat that, Mark?
What is the source of the commission's funding?
Oh, okay. So
do you have any legal authority over Kansas City Sports?
So no, we have no legal authority. However, our funding on a normal year, we'll go back to 2019, our funding is about 65% of our funding is from the events that we own and operate. The marathon, our awards programs, Camp Win, our triathlons, the Thanksgiving Day run, that funding is where the bulk of our money comes from. Then we have sponsorships is another piece of that. We have donors separate from sponsorships. We have a board of directors, 27 board members that have a financial commitment to serve on the board. And then lastly, we have the Missouri Amateur Sports Tax Credit. And that is a very small percentage of our funding, but it is funding for us. When we host a national event where we've bid against another state, we're able to utilize an amateur tax credit that goes back to offset expenses and helps us as well pay for staffing and things like that.
Question on the NHL and NBA possibilities. There has been discussion that AEG, far from trying to land a franchise, a tenant for T-Mobile, actually worked to prevent that from happening under the pretext that concerts were better for the arena in the city. What's your comment on that?
I don't know that they've ever worked against it. They're in every meeting that I am in with NBA. We do not have anything with NHL, any discussions right now happening. I had an NBA call this morning, and the NBA is interesting. It would be easier for us to relocate a team than it would be to be an expansion city. When I say easier, financially, it makes way more sense. If I'm someone with a checkbook that can do that, it makes a lot more sense for us to be able to relocate an NBA team than it would be to start one from scratch. So we do have an ownership group out there that we actually have a couple owners / ownership group that have an interest. It hasn't gone very far because there's just not, I think there's not an appetite for Kansas City, but we're at the mercy of the NBA to say, yes, we're going to expand. And now here's how the bid process works. We've heard Seattle is probably a given and probably Las Vegas, but even they're like, what happens next? I think on behalf of AEG, and I certainly am not speaking for them by any means. And now it's AEG is now called ASM. ASM is the managing partner for T-Mobile Center. There's always an interest to have, a group inside of that arena. Right now, they're extremely successful in concerts and other things that happened, but that doesn't mean they're not open to that conversation. I'm not aware that they blocked anything. I think they've always been at the table with us on these conversations. I think in everyone's best interest, you have to decide if it makes financial sense.
Are we ready for a bi-state dome initiative yet? We'd love to see if KC hosts the Super Bowl.
I don't know that. It's funny. I was on a very small scale involved with Union Station and that bi-state tax, and that was hard. And I don't know that there's an appetite for any type of bi-state tax again. We are not in any discussion about a dome. We are in discussions with the NFL about hosting a Super Bowl at some point when they're ready to go back to a cold weather city. I think we'll be top of the list, at least for consideration. We don't bid on men's Final Four. To bid on a men's Final Four, it requires a 60,000 seat arena or stadium. And so we just don't have that. So we're just not chasing that one. But that doesn't mean things like the new women's soccer stadium, where they're building a 10,000 seat stadium that could expand. As we get into this with them, it could be that we figure out a dome there where maybe we host, we bring back Division II football championships, and we, do something crazy with lacrosse and other sports. But a dome conversation over like an Arrowhead football stadium is not on our radar.
I'm going to wrap up with a question for me. When you're at the Kansas City Sports Commission, are you representing the entire region, Kansas and Missouri, or are you really focused on just getting it to Kansas City, Missouri?
No, we're the greater Kansas City Sports Commission. Same with Visit KC. It really comes down on my sports commission hat. It comes down to venues. So we have hosted things at Children's Mercy Park and KCK, of course, working with Kansas Speedway. If there's ever an opportunity there, we've worked with now the Monarchs, used to be the T-Bones, on could we put high school baseball or small college baseball there? But it comes down to venues. And for us, most of our venues are on the Missouri side.
Well, I don't know how you do everything you do, but I'm sure glad you do it, because you do a great job. Thank you. I know you guys are so busy, and we can't tell you how much we appreciate you meeting us on the Zoom call today. And hopefully next year we can meet with you in person. Thank you
Would
so
love
much.
that. Well, it's such an honor. Mike Alden is one of my dearest friends, so I feel like this is a great connection for me. So thank you guys for what you do.
All right. Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks,
Dave,
everyone.
thank you as well. Hey,
Sure.
folks, thanks. This has been great. Of course, tell everybody they can watch this on YouTube, but we'll get it posted there tomorrow. Our guest next week will be Pat Forty, senior writer for Sports Illustrated, and his son, Mitchell Forty, who writes for Power Mizzou. Of course, they're both proud graduates of University of Missouri School of Journalism. So they were with us last year and very informative, and I think you'll enjoy them. Thanks again for joining us. Especially thanks to Kathy and Dave taking time out from their busy schedule. We'll see you all next week.